Chaos Merchants is based on Tupac 187 by R.J. Bond and Michael Douglas Carlin. $500 million up for grabs, picking at Suge's old scabs. The deck is always stacked against death row, says the employee, who asked not to be identified, so we always bring our own deck. And behind bars or not, Knight always deals the cards. It is clear in the aftermath of the Tupac and Suge shooting on September 7, 1996, that Suge Knight no longer trusted Reggie Wright to handle his security. He uses his homeboys instead, a fact that Reggie Wright snitches through Kevin Lewis to LAPD senior lead Ken Knox. Using convicted felons as security was a violation of Suge's probation. Reggie Wright also snitches Knox directly that Suge has been traveling out of the country, another probation violation. Reggie is trying desperately to get Suge's probation revoked. I remember seeing the stuff for Belize, tickets and the like. He was setting shit up. At that time, you could purchase citizenship, secondary citizenship. I remember seeing stuff for buying property, setting up bank accounts. Knight doesn't know who to trust. His head of security is blaming this all on Frank Alexander. Reggie has almost convinced Suge to kill Frank for not having his gun on him that night. The hole is dug and the preparations are made. The conversations were heated, but things were not completely adding up. Reggie, the head of death row security, was taking absolutely no responsibility for what had happened. Certain things seemed out of order that night. It was all Reggie's fault. It wasn't even something where you could debate it. Every decision came from Reggie's mouth. It was Reggie that was adamant that Suge travel with Tupac, and he laid out the route. Both of those things were out of the ordinary, and that was weighing on Suge Knight's mind. Come to think of it, Reggie was also adamant about having Tupac come to Vegas. He was there encouraging Suge Knight to call Tupac and tell him that he would quash everything and pay him if he just came to Vegas to sort this all out. Reluctantly, Tupac agreed. Yeah, but Reggie Wright seemed a little too preoccupied with all of this. It would be a long time before Suge completely trusted Reggie Wright Jr. again. Certain things were not adding up. Certain things were being kept from Suge. When confronted, Reggie would simply brush it off. From now on, Suge would only travel with his homeboys. He already distrusted cops, and many in the employment of death row security were cops. Reggie was sure to tell Suge that Kevin Hackey was working undercover to infiltrate death row records because of the incident at the hospital, and Sharitha was also dating a cop. That made Suge even more paranoid. Now, it was time to get back to basics. Yes, back to only using homeboys for security. Speculation about who would run death row records was one thing, but as a practical matter, with Suge still calling the shots, behind bars, he could assign that task to the person of his choosing. So far, he hadn't signed paperwork putting Reggie Wright Jr. in charge, as Reggie Wright Sr. had speculated. There was only so much that could be gutted from the record label without Suge granting authority to the conspirators. Meanwhile, Knight's absence has created a complicated and hectic atmosphere at Death Row's Beverly Hills headquarters, according to a longtime employee, but the current obstacles are not seen as insurmountable. To the contrary, the label's staff seems galvanized, hell, downright energized by the predicament, once again tapping into a unique corporate culture that is equal parts blustery confidence and persecution complex. We started having problems getting things done because she, Michelle A., wouldn't take the information to Suge to get it done. Suge began serving his 9-year sentence at the California Men's Colony and San Luis Obispo, where he was barred by law from running death row, saw half of the label's staff get laid off, and watched creditors like American Express continue demanding payment. Immediately after his imprisonment, he noticed the death row family disbanded. Where the label once promoted a united front, artists had scattered to the four winds. The fervor to keep Suge out of prison was only window dressing to stay close to Suge in order to take over death row after the sentencing. On November 25th, Suge began to understand. He heard things on the inside that caused him to doubt Reggie. When Compton police and evidence was used to revoke his probation, Instead of to release him, he was now convinced not to trust Reggie and Kenner, but did he really have a choice? Suge brought Milton Grimes on as lead counsel to represent him as his criminal attorney with David Kenner still as co-counsel. Kenner had health issues, probably caused by the stress, but there was now clearly distance there. Attorney David Kenner underwent triple bypass heart surgery. Some of Knight's associates even go so far as to privately blame Kenner for giving Knight legal advice that they feel may have put the rap entrepreneur and his company in jeopardy, reporter Chuck Phillips wrote. Michelle A. was used as his new liaison with the record label and nothing was getting done. Kenner and Wright Jr. had sowed the seeds of chaos inside of Death Row Records that persisted until after the sentencing. Suge didn't want to put anyone in place to run the company while he was in prison, thinking he would still be able to run things from behind bars. It worked for a little while, but eventually he lost all power. He could no longer maintain control of his rappers while he was locked up. His over-the-phone threats scared no one. Everybody was trying to get all they could before leaving the label since it was sinking. What were Suge's options? His estranged wife? David Kenner? Who could Suge trust? But was Suge Knight himself trustworthy? Suge's dilemma. Who is he going to trust with the record label? Reggie Wright played on Suge's hatred for Sean Combs. Suge had always blamed Combs for the murder of Jake Robles, Suge's best friend. Getting back into Suge's good graces may have been easily planned by taking the life of Combs' top earner, Biggie Smalls. Suge Knight was in jail at the time, and it would be difficult to prove that he had prior knowledge of this plot. There is a significant tell that Suge Knight had no prior knowledge of this hit, and that stems from the numerous telephone calls that come in telling investigators that Suge Knight is responsible for the murder. In the aftermath of the El Rey murder, the anonymous calls placed blame at the feet of DJ Quick that was not a death row artist. In the aftermath of the Tupac murder, the anonymous calls blamed Orlando Anderson, who had an airtight alibi. The calls that came in blaming Suge Knight for the murder were an attempt to inflame prosecutors to pile additional charges onto Suge Knight so Death Row's assets could be plundered beyond the 5 years Suge would serve. The grand gesture to win the vesture. Reggie says, "We ain't going to be hurting for nothing." Reggie fueled that fire by blaming Sean Combs for the attempted murder of Suge, but things were not adding up. Reggie was caught in a number of lies. Suge was having doubts about the stories. He was hearing things. Reggie needed to regain Suge's trust to seal what had been put in motion with the murder of Tupac and the attempted murder of Suge, with all of that planning at the beating of Orlando Anderson and maneuvering to get Suge violated and sentenced. It was all for nothing if Suge did not sign over power of attorney to Reggie. There needed to be a monumental act of loyalty to get Suge's signature on the forms. The only way Reggie could prove his loyalty to Suge and get him to sign the paperwork putting Reggie at the helm of Death Row Records was for Reggie to avenge Sean Combs on behalf of Suge Knight. Biggie Smalls just happened to be in town. As Sean Combs' biggest breadwinner, it would satisfy Suge to know he had finally gotten not just even, but a little further ahead. Reggie would play on Suge's hatred of Sean Puffy Combs, who Suge held responsible for the murder of Jake Robles. Biggie Smalls just happened to be in town. Reggie put young hot chicks inside Biggie's camp to monitor the situation and relay information. The perfect opportunity would come at the after party for the Vibe Awards. He sent off-duty comps the night before to assist the security, and they plotted the hit. This time, they would learn from the Tupac murder and use a professional shooter and armor-piercing Gecko ammunition. They watched Biggie's every move while he was at the museum. As he headed for his car, they knew the opportunity would soon be ripe for the perfect moment. Biggie's SUV headed north on Fairfax and stopped at the red light. A Chevy Impala SS pulled alongside. An arm appeared with a gun. Shots were fired in a tight pattern that only hit Biggie. None of the other 5 passengers were hit. In a few moments, Biggie Smalls, Sean Puffy Combs' biggest earner, was dead. Reggie now had what he needed to get Suge Knight to sign off, allowing him to run Death Row Records. At the next visit, Reggie relayed the story of how it all went down. He urged Suge to take credit for it by saying he had coordinated it from his cell with a cellular telephone. They had all worked so hard to kill Biggie Smalls, but the controversy surrounding the Tupac murder still haunted them. Was he really still alive and in protective custody? They had to be sure. Rafael Perez agreed to visit the morgue to see the body and confirm the kill. He used his normal protocol to get through security measures and was able to confirm that Biggie Smalls was indeed dead. Reggie was sure to relay to Suge that Rafael Perez had seen Biggie's body. He was confirmed to be dead. Reggie then slid the paperwork in front of Suge after professing his undying loyalty. Suge Knight didn't even hesitate. He signed the company away to Reggie. It would be years before Suge understood what had really happened. Big news, the murder of Biggie Smalls. Sign right here. Daz said, after Tupac was killed, everybody started doing their own thing. There was turmoil and chaos. I was like, fuck that. We got too much over here and too many songs. I was trying to figure out how I could get those songs that we did, so that's when I became president of Death Row. Reggie Wright was running it, and I was the creative force putting shit together. Reggie Wright Jr. was second in command at Death Row Records and ended up running record label after Suge was incarcerated by maneuvering himself into that position. The chaos at Death Row Records that began October 22nd when Suge is arrested and put in jail ends when Wright is put in charge. Daz said, we fell out. I suckered them for the reels. I took all the reels and made all blanks. Rewrote all the titles on there and gave them the reels, and I took off with the masters. Because Reggie didn't know nothing about putting the reels on there and listening to the tape. Reggie is running the show over there. Since Knight's incarceration, his now estranged wife, Sharitha Knight, has been taking care of the day-to-day operations of Death Row Records. April 28, 2000, Death Row Records transfers 8200 Wilshire Boulevard property to Reggie Wright Jr. The McPherson lawsuit confirms that Kenner and Wright working closely while Suge was away. Senseless 187 to complete the 211. The government hates rap. You know why I say that? Because they don't arrest anybody that kills rappers. They don't got no clues, no suspects. They don't have shit when there's a dead rapper. They don't fill out a police report. They don't even have a chalk line when there's a dead rapper. Shit, if you want to get away with murder, all you got to do is shoot somebody in the head and put a demo tape in their pocket. Chris Rock. The similarities between Tupac's death and Biggie's was uncanny. They were both shot down at a traffic light. Both had females distracting them when the shots rang out. Experience modification from Tupac's murder to Biggie's murder. Gang kids used for Tupac's murder with regular ammo and a wide pattern of bullets. Biggie's murder used a professional assassin with armor-piercing ammunition and a tight pattern with almost same drive-by tactics. Motive. Take away Sean Puffy Combs' biggest earner to get into Suge's good graces so he would sign over the record label worth $500 million. Christopher Wallace, aka Biggie Smalls, is murdered on a Los Angeles street. The murder also further galvanizes the East Coast-West Coast feud to throw investigators off of the trail of actual murderers in Tupac Shakur's murder. Means: off-duty LAPD cops working with a professional hitman. Opportunity: women infiltrated Biggie's camp to tell them where he would be and to encourage him to attend the Peterson Museum. They created the perfect opportunity. Suge Knight relayed the entire story to Mario Hammonds, who was a former reliable informant for the FBI, but too many insiders close to Reggie leaked his name and derailed the investigation. Psycho Mike heard the story from Amir Muhammad. He was beaten and ultimately perished as a result of this. Kenneth Boagni heard the story from Rafael Perez. His testimony was good enough to clear many LAPD officers, but was never taken seriously by investigators because this led to places too embarrassing for the department. Police files were hidden from the plaintiffs in the Wallace civil trial by LAPD. Shortly after Wallace's murder, plaintiff Voletta Wallace received an anonymous telephone call. The caller stated that a person identified as D. Mac was involved in Wallace's murder. Consequently, plaintiff Voletta Wallace contacted the LAPD and gave them the information she had received from the anonymous caller. She also requested that the LAPD investigate the tip. During the conversation, plaintiff Voletta Wallace was informed that the telephone directory contained over 500 listings under D. Mac. Plaintiffs allege that the LAPD did not follow up on the clue provided by plaintiff Voletta Wallace. In fact, plaintiff Voletta Wallace did not learn that there existed an LAPD officer named D. Mac until reading the June 7, 2001 article in Rolling Stone magazine. The LA City Attorney snuck files into Wayman Anderson to derail the second Wallace civil trial, but there is ample evidence that Suge was told about this during one of his visits by Reggie Wright Jr. Mario Hammonds tells us 2 of the names Knight had mentioned in connection to the murder were Reg, believed to be Death Row's then Director of Security, Reggie Wright Jr., and an individual he referred to as Big Sykes. Knight went on to name 2 other members of the team that had taken Big out, according to Hammonds, David Mack and Amir Muhammad. Knight told Hammonds that all 4 had helped him arrange the murder by phone while he was incarcerated at the county jail in Los Angeles, and he gradually offered details about how the killing had been accomplished. 2 women who had infiltrated the bad boy camp provided the information about when and where Big would be exposed, and his team had coordinated events on the night of the murder using cell phones. Knight never did tell him who exactly pulled the trigger, Hammond said. He did, however, ultimately reveal that his story about Big's killing being payback for Tupac's murder was a smokescreen. Hammond said, adding that shortly before Knight's transfer to Mule Creek State Prison, he say, "Later on, down the line, you'll see the big picture. It's about money." Knight also told Hammonds he had no concern about being charged with Big's death. He told me this out of his own mouth, that because LAPD was involved, that this murder would never be solved, and that if anybody says anything against me, I can find out. Yameh Crystal told about LAPD destroying evidence to cover up the murder investigation into Christopher Wallace's murder. Mario Hammonds, Kevin Hackey, Psycho Mike, Kenny Boagni are all discredited without specific evidence, even though many of their testimony is considered credible in other investigations, including clearing LAPD officers and Board of Rights hearings for wrongdoing. They all provide specific evidence of LAPD police involvement in murder of Christopher Wallace organized by Reggie Wright Jr. First civil trial in estate of Christopher Wallace is declared a mistrial when evidence is suppressed by City of Los Angeles and LAPD specifically in wrongful death of Wallace. Evidence pointed to involvement of off-duty police and Reggie Wright Jr. in murder of Christopher Wallace. Second civil trial in estate of Christopher Wallace is dismissed with promise by City of Los Angeles and LAPD that they would redouble investigation. They tell lead investigator to shut down the case 24 hours after the settlement. Since the release of Tupac 187, 2 witnesses have come forward. One of them states that she saw and talked to Rafael Perez on the night before the murder of Christopher Wallace and the night of the murder. She was afraid to come forward earlier because she was in fear of her life. We have also had a rapper tweet to us that he knows that Snoop had prior knowledge of the murder of Tupac Shakur before that murder happened. There's no way I could have known that Perez had visited the morgue to see the body unless Ray told me. He told them exactly how the killing took place and gave them several names. He told them of the clandestine meetings with Death Row's security team that Ray and Mac attended. Perry Sanders said, "Mr. Boagni, Your name was absolutely nowhere on any of the LAPD's records or interviews. You see, that trial was put on hold after I got a call saying someone named Kenny Boagni had key information which he'd already given to Detective Katz of the LAPD. COINTELPRO, you don't even know. Big Brother put the product on the streets? Moved shit on Learjets with artists slanging beats. Detective Russell Poole met with resistance inside of LAPD to fully investigate the murder of Christopher Wallace and to fully investigate corruption of Officer Kevin Gaines by department leadership. There are photos of Michelle Parks found in the Rampart cops' personal effects. Michelle is also caught with cocaine in Las Vegas, and that case evaporates. Russell, later, is pulled off of the cases and reassigned and eventually pushed out of the department. His reports on the incidents are gutted, and much of the information disappears along with Frank Liga's personal package. Controversial Detective Frank Liga said he once threatened to reveal to the media that his 1997 shooting of fellow cop Kevin Gaines was a sanctioned hit on Gaines by LAPD, according to a memo purported to be written by an LAPD officer to Assistant Chief Earl Paysinger, documenting a talk Liga gave at the LA Police Academy late last year, LA Weekly. The fact is, Knight doesn't really have to have direct involvement in the numerous ongoing killings relating to people at his label. The low expectations that stem from the very name Death Row will spin most workers and associates into sort of a stupidity autopilot that lasts for years. Attorney Arthur Behrens was quoted by Associated Press as saying, "They come to his house, they come to his office, they intimidated his wife, they intimidated his employees. What's the point of this? The point is, Behrens, people are dying. Do any of you readers recall people loyal to the Temptations shooting it out with people close to Curtis Mayfield in the 60s? Does Suge Knight recall James Brown and Wilson Pickett feuding over women and turf, ending with Brown ordering that Wilson be shot while Brown flails his arms shouting, "King Records! King Records!" No, and as funny as that sounds, it's just what's happening today. Where have you gone, Berry Gordy, and other black record company founders, now that we need you? It always comes down to the money. $400 million in Biggie's lifetime earnings and $600 million for Tupac. For the city of Los Angeles, this is $1 billion problem. If a jury were to award punitive damages, it becomes a $4 billion problem. But Valletta Wallace said she wasn't about the money. She just wanted justice for her son. Afeni Shakur can also be negotiated with to reach a settlement to pursue this case and bring Tupac's murderers to justice. Additionally, if Suge Knight is right and the perpetrators of the crime took $80 million of his money, then they have ample money to mount the defense. Money alone should not deter law enforcement from doing the right thing. We need to make a statement that no matter how much money you have, that you cannot get away with any murder, especially the worst kind, the premeditated murder. Executive Order 12,333 provides that any CIA operatives are to be unmolested by any law enforcement agencies. Many investigations into drug trafficking in the 80s and 90s were compromised and subsequently dropped because of this executive order. David Kenner would know that from his membership in the drug club. No doubt, this explains why any and all investigations of Death Row Records, David Kenner, and Reggie Wright have never resulted in an arrest, indictment, trial, or conviction. There are 100 sources about the CIA putting drugs out on the streets of America to fund their covert operations. They were fighting communism. They reasoned that they were fighting for our freedom. When there was a conflict between somebody protected by the CIA and law enforcement, the CIA would trump local and federal jurisdiction. America is the country with the checkered past. We condoned slavery, killed off the Native Americans and stole their land, Watergate, the Kennedy assassination, Iran-Contra, and recently Iraq, where there were no weapons of mass destruction. Americans can handle the truth. It is time to bring all of the murderers to justice and to clean out all of our police departments nationwide, purging them from all of their corruption. Jim McDonald, so far, has proved he is the right man for the job. Let's get behind him cleaning up the residue from the sheriff's department, and then either get Charlie Beck on board or get his replacement in line to tackle this problem. What we can't do is maintain the status quo. Russell and I would always talk about only wanting the truth wherever that leads. Please join this fight with me and help me get Russell Poole's message out there. Please pass this on to others who can put pressure on law enforcement to do the right thing. These are the footnotes for Part 9. Footnote 322. Frank Alexander's secret tape recordings in the aftermath of the Tupac murder. VladTV.com. Daz Dillinger says Michelle A. fucks up death row. Kevin Hackey interview with LAP detectives Miller and Poole, 5/12/1998. Las Vegas Sun. The Death of Tupac Shakur, 1 year later, by Kathy Scott. My Blood, My Sweat, My Tears. The Autobiography of Jewel Caples, by Felicia St. John. Wallace Civil Trial, July 23, 2002. Order granting and denying motions in Wallace Estate versus City of Los Angeles. Rolling Stone article by Randall Sullivan. The Unsolved Mystery of the Notorious B.I.G. Prison Secrets, the LAPD's notorious cover-up of Biggie's murder, by Kenny Boagni. This is the end of Part 9 of Chaos Merchants. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the final conclusion in Part 10.